I'm sure that anyone who is a cartoon fan is aware of the massive TV show called SpongeBob SquarePants. The adventures and fun times of an anthropomorphic sea sponge and his underwater pals. I'm all too familiar with this show, as I grew up with the show ever since it first started airing, right as the 90s were coming to their conclusion. This show has had such an expansive history over its 20 plus years of airing on TV, with stupendous highs like Band Geeks and Chocolate with Nuts, to outrageous lows like Boating Buddies and One Course Meal. These episodes in particular were all the rave online, with critics and other fans of the show coming together to assassinate it and point out the serious numbers of flaws. I stopped watching the show before season 7 aired, due to one particular episode. This episode has kind of flown under the radar in comparison to episodes like House Fancy or The Splinter. I later discovered why that was. This version of the episode that I watched was not the widely distributed one. I have no idea about how this version of the episode came to be, nor do I really want to know. All I can say is how I acquired this particular version of the episode. I was active on forums at the time when 4chan and Something Awful were in their prime. The year was 2009, and I was still a massive SpongeBob fan, despite all of the really bad episodes that were releasing at the time. I was in the forum chat with some other people, discussing our experiences with the show, how we found the show, our favourite characters, our favourite episodes, etc. However, one thing a particular user said caught all of our attention immediately. Do you want to see an unreleased episode of SpongeBob that will be released sometime next month? Obviously, we were very skeptical of this user. This had massive computer virus written all over it. My curiosity got the better of me, however. If this actually was legitimate, I could be one of the few lucky people to see some unreleased media a whole month in advance before anybody else would. So I downloaded some antivirus software like Avast and continued messaging this user. I was an animator on SpongeBob. I worked on the show since season 2 began, and I was one of the few original animators to not jump the ship when Steven Hillenburg announced his departure from the show. This user began. After he left, I mainly contributed to season 5 and season 6 episodes. This particular episode was cut due to it being deemed too dark for the kids to watch, and the official episode that would be released would be drastically lighter in tone. The user continued. I helped animate this particular episode before it was released, and managed to snag a copy before they permanently shelved it. I helped to bring a more mature and darker edge to these episodes, before those greedy snakes fired me. They act as if kids these days are as fragile as glass. Whatever happened to the days like Ren and Stimpy and Rocco's Modern Life? Those pussies couldn't handle a clown at a damn carnival. The user ranted. It appeared that he had gotten into some kind of conflict or sour moment with the company, as he went on a total tirade about how shitty the business was, and how all they cared about was safe distributable nonsense for the kids to gobble up, while the parents lit up cigars, wishing they wore rubbers. This episode was a secret for a variety of reasons. Those corporate slaves would never want this episode to be made public, the person explained. All that I'll say is that me and some others had a really fun time animating this. Enjoy it, I'm sure it will be an episode you will never forget," the user concluded, before he sent me the link to the video and went offline. This was all he offered me in terms of general concrete information behind the scenes. The episode he had apparently acquired was entitled Pineapple Fever. I thought it was an odd name, so I proceeded to download it to my computer. The downloaded file contained an MP4 file within it, so it definitely did contain a video of some kind. I loaded it up into my video playing software and waited for it to start. I was fairly certain that this would be some kind of massive screamer or other kind of video to mess with me, but a shred of hope secretly wished that this was actually real. The file had finished loading, and to my surprise, it was an actual SpongeBob SquarePants episode that was playing. It began with the iconic and well-beloved intro to SpongeBob SquarePants, with the pirate portrait singing the song. It concluded with the porous yellow sponge playing his nose like a flute, before it faded into the main title card. The title card was typical of a SpongeBob episode, except it resembled more of a painting style. It was a shot of SpongeBob's pineapple house, but with a rusted chain secured around it, making sure that it was locked. Nestled in the corner was the title card, Pineapple Fever. I thought that this could be an episode where Patrick or maybe SpongeBob locked themselves within the house, and the story would be the two of them trying to escape. And when the episode finally began, it seemed that my theory was being proven correct. It began with both SpongeBob and Patrick sitting on SpongeBob's sofa watching the television. Patrick was messily eating at some peanut butter and chocolate. His floral green shorts were now stained with peanut butter and chocolate. SpongeBob was sat opposite to Patrick. He was jittering slightly in place, very excited to see where the show was going. It appeared that the two of them were watching some kind of special episode of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
"Oh, Patrick, this is the best part! Turn it up!"
SpongeBob excitedly said to his sea star friend as he moved in place.
"Sure thing, SpongeBob,"
Patrick responded as he pulled out a comically large speaker out of nowhere before slamming it to the ground and pressing a button to turn it on. I was shocked. The voices sounded almost exactly like the normal voice actors. However, I could tell that they weren't the original actors. Squidward's voice, for example, was a little more scratchier than usual, and Patrick's voice was a little too dumb sounding. But I digress. The noise from the speaker was then amplified to an almost cringe-inducing level, even making the house shuffle and bounce along with it. But of course, SpongeBob and Patrick were oblivious to the noise, as they both cheered loudly as Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy took down Man Ray. The camera then zoomed out of SpongeBob's house to showcase Squidward, their grumpy next-door neighbour, sitting down on his sofa watching the news. Now, he was supposed to be watching a new episode of a show showcasing fancy teapots, but he was interrupted by a breaking news message. Squidward sighed and rolled his eyes, but continued to watch the screen.
"Breaking news!
The news anchor fish began.
Bikini Bottom is experiencing all matters of a storm. This includes high rain."
The fishes in the background then got drenched by the water.
"Intense and strong winds."
A nearby fish's newspaper stand then got blown up and was carried away.
"And lastly, lightning."
The news anchor fish concluded before he was comedically struck by the lightning, and the news broadcast then cut to silence. I won't drag too long on this episode, however. I'm sure that all of you here have at least seen the episode Pineapple Fever one time. And this episode that I got was mostly the same as the original one, but I'll give a quick summary. It did continue a little bit differently. Instead of Squidward tweezing his eyebrows off and running to SpongeBob's house to complain, the circumstances of how he got there were a little different. Squidward went around his house and made sure that all of his windows were secure. He also went and locked away his trusty clarinet into a nearby safe for safekeeping. He was about to go and sit down, but the loud noise from SpongeBob and Patrick's speakers caused the teacup that he was holding to shatter onto the ground. A close-up zoom shows Squidward's face as his eyes turn into volcanoes. He immediately slams open his door and runs over to SpongeBob and Patrick's house. The episode then realigns with the normal episode, as Squidward is forced to stay with SpongeBob and Patrick as the storm overtakes them. They play some games to pass the time, and we watch more and more as Squidward is annoyed. But here is where the episode really gets different. Instead of it being shown that the trio had been locked in SpongeBob's house for just one afternoon, we were instead treated to one of the show's signature title cards, with the French narrator saying,
A few weeks later.
Even without this title card, it was very clear to see that several weeks had passed. The storm was still raging in the background as the camera panned around to showcase SpongeBob's pineapple residence. The walls of the home were now a sickly, disgusting shade of orange. It looked as if parts of it were even peeling off. There were distinct scent lines throughout the building, indicating it reeked of a foul odour. Furniture was tossed around and smashed throughout the many rooms of the pineapple. Packets and empty cans laid about the destroyed kitchen. The fridge's door laid in front of the actual entrance, and it was surprisingly still intact. I'm guessing despite whatever happened in the time skip, they had retained some manner of self-preservation. I did notice that the walls of the kitchen and the fridge were smeared and stained with grime and other filth that I don't even want to know. All things resembling potential food and hydration were picked clean. The worst parts of this, however, were for sure the characters. Squidward was huddled in a corner, eyes wide and bloodshot. He was skinny and frail looking. His entire body was slouched against a wall, while he was breathing heavily. His brown shirt was crumpled and torn in certain spots, chunks of the fabric having been removed. His tentacles were bruised, and one was even a gross-looking shade of purple. He looked absolutely miserable. Even when Squidward was at his absolute worst, he never looked like this. He looked as if he was attacked by some kind of wild animal. SpongeBob was humming to himself while sitting in his armchair. His smart attire was practically in shambles. His sleeves were torn, his tie was completely absent, and his entire shirt was stained with who knows what. His shoes had giant holes in them exposing his feet. He looked just as tired as Squidward was. Frail and weak, the sponge appeared to be. What drew my attention immediately was SpongeBob's lips. There was visible blood all over it. Before I could ponder why, the camera zoomed down to showcase a busted open and cracked shell. I knew what had happened. Knowing how dire the food situation must have become, it was obvious SpongeBob had killed and consumed his loyal pet. The tears were most likely from guilt that SpongeBob was feeling over having no choice but to eat his loyal pet to survive. My mouth became agape at what I was seeing. I was just in shock. The animation, it definitely looked professionally done. The blood was drawn so perfectly that it fit into SpongeBob's universe almost seamlessly. The blood was cartoony and it was detailed. Why would somebody animate this? I get holding a grudge against a company and all, but what if a little kid stumbled across this episode online? That would be one ruined childhood for sure. However, the worst one was for definite Patrick. His floral pattern trunks were stained so much that the patterns weren't even visible anymore. Hell, the entire thing was completely brown. He had an extended belly. It was no doubt Patrick had been a drain on their seriously dwindling food supplies. He was laughing to himself, coiled into a ball in the corner of the room. No doubt, all of them were slowly going insane, and it was inevitable that conflict would happen at some point. And as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. It cut away from the overweight sea star and back to SpongeBob, who was now weakly pulling himself to his feet. Dragging along the floor, the sponge then proceeded upstairs into his room and sat down quietly on the disheveled bed, while eyeing his now smashed foghorn alarm clock. He stared out of the broken porthole window, clearly checking to see if the storm had dissipated, which, to the sponge's sadness, it had not. He sighed forlornly and reached into his wardrobe and retrieved his final pair of clean clothes. He put them on and trekked down the stairs to the kitchen area where the others were situated. They then heard a loud rumbling sound that indicated somebody in the room was hungry. It panned over to show that Patrick was the cause of this. He spoke out in a tired and lazy voice.
Squidward, where is all the food?
Patrick weakly choked out as he rubbed his tummy.
Patrick, you ate it all!
Squidward snapped back. In truth, he was tired of dealing with this fat oaf of a sea star. Throughout all of his life, he had done nothing but harassed, bullied, hurt, beat, and tortured him. And he was not in the mood to be dealing with him.
Squidward, you had the last packet of stale food. It was clearly you who was hogging it all.
Patrick responded back in an offended tone, while the camera panned down to emphasize his extended belly. This starkly contrasted SpongeBob and Squidward, who were frail and malnourished. This, however, was the tipping point. Decades of misery, crushed dreams, and pain, all bottled up within the octopus's mind. He had held back everything in some feeble attempt to try and get through to Patrick and SpongeBob. But that one statement was like the floodgates of hell opening. Squidward screamed in the most anger-filled way that I had ever seen a cartoon character scream. His face was red, with pulsating veins all over, indicating the octopus had finally had enough. He jumped forward and seized Patrick by the throat, pinning the gluttonous pink sea star onto the wall with extreme force. Patrick immediately began gagging and choking in response. He flailed his chubby pink arms in an attempt to try and break free. Squidward held firm and even began slapping the sea star rapidly to try and get him to stop resisting. SpongeBob's eyes immediately became wide at this, and a sudden jolt of adrenaline made him dash forward, trying to pull Squidward off of Patrick. Eventually, Patrick managed to break free by biting down hard on Squidward's hand, causing the octopus to yell out and drop him to the floor.
Squidward, stop it! Patrick didn't eat it all. We all had some.
SpongeBob yelled out to try and stop the octopus from hurting Patrick anymore.
Well, SpongeBob, you clearly had more than me. You can yell, while I can barely lift a spoon.
Patrick said ungratefully, as he held a spoon weakly, before dropping it with exaggeration, his entire body falling with the spoon to prove the point.
I ate more! Patrick, look at you! You're tubby!
SpongeBob yelled while pointing at Patrick's stomach. The hunger had finally got to SpongeBob. The nice fry cook with a heart of gold was gone. In his place was a desperate being, craving food, no sense of friendship, only survival. He realized in that split second that Patrick was always to blame for their food situation. He had gobbled up all of SpongeBob's frozen food in one fell swoop, instead of rationing it as he and Squidward did. If it wasn't for Patrick, maybe SpongeBob didn't have to eat Gary. He really was a fat, bumbling idiot. Patrick growled loudly in pure rage. He spun around to face SpongeBob with angry eyes and gnashing teeth.
Nobody calls me Tubby!
Patrick bellowed as he pounced onto SpongeBob. Patrick began biting down hard onto SpongeBob's arm. There was no blood that came from the wound, but rather yellow chunks of SpongeBob's arm flew off and onto the floor. SpongeBob yelled out in pain and horror at what Patrick was doing to him, but he found the strength to fight back. SpongeBob retaliated by kicking him hard, causing the starfish to fall back and bang his head onto a nearby shelf. Squidward, seeing the commotion, simply backed away and ran into the living room behind the sofa for some form of comfort, afraid for his life and the deterioration of SpongeBob and Patrick's mental state. SpongeBob ran back into the kitchen and withdrew a knife. He held it close to him, his eye twitching in rage and fear. I'm guessing that this was the knife that SpongeBob had used to try and mercifully euthanize Gary, because the knife had a little bit of dried blood on the blade. Patrick soon barreled into the kitchen, holding his own version of a weapon in his hands. It was at this point that I noticed that the animation had also taken a dip in terms of quality. It was hard to make out the details of what Patrick was holding. However, from what I could make out, it looked like some kind of chair leg from one of the broken pieces of furniture. I'm guessing that they had to rush this episode to meet the standards and time requirements of Nickelodeon. SpongeBob and Patrick had a face-off in the kitchen. Determined to try and not hurt his friend, SpongeBob grabbed one of the nearby cans and lobbed it in Patrick's direction. It connected and landed square in the face of Patrick. He made a grunt of pain and scrunched up his eyes as he was rubbing them, trying to deal with the pain. Taking the chance, SpongeBob made his way out of the kitchen and began to walk around his pineapple. The camera panned around, showing many instances of how the pineapple was destroyed. SpongeBob's eyes turned to tears as the realization of everything that had happened to him finally hit him square in the face. So many happy memories made here. Having Squidward move in temporarily, cooking Krabby Patties on the occasion, and of course first moving in and getting Gary for the first time. Seeing all of these loving memories destroyed finally caused the sea sponge to snap. Patrick eventually caught sight of SpongeBob. With zero hesitation, he made a mad dash towards SpongeBob. The extra food in the starfish contributed to his speed in the matter. SpongeBob turned around and saw Patrick jumping off of a nearby chair and flying down towards him. A loud slash was then heard. Then, silence. Squidward finally stopped trembling behind the sofa as he noticed the lack of volume in the pineapple. Pulling himself to his feet, he rounded the corner towards the entrance of the house. The camera then zoomed in on his face. There was no anger, no resentment, no rage, and no hatred. Instead, an expression of pure shock and sadness was planted on his face. Patrick was unmoving on top of SpongeBob. The kitchen knife was now buried deep within his head. There was also no blood from Patrick despite the attack. Rather, the knife was just stuck there, deeply implanted within Patrick's head, blocking the chance for any bodily fluids to ooze from the wound. SpongeBob, however, was not unmoving. He was groaning in pain. Patrick had caught him in the chest with the broken chair leg. His legs were crushed due to Patrick's enormous weight, and because of SpongeBob's malnourishment. Squidward then finally came back to Earth as he tried to pull Patrick's body away from SpongeBob's. After a good 30 seconds, and using some nearby objects to assist him, he was successful as he heaved the body of Patrick away from SpongeBob. Patrick's form now laid motionless on the ground. Squidward turned to kneel down to SpongeBob. He wrapped his shoulder around SpongeBob's in a desperate attempt to support him and to try and get the fry cook back on his feet. But inevitably, a loud crack sounded as SpongeBob fell to the floor, his legs now useless and damaged beyond repair. It seemed even in this moment, SpongeBob couldn't find the strength to regenerate himself. He could barely move by now. His breathing was slowly faltering. His eyes were barely open. His time was almost up. Squidward was too in shock to speak. He tried uttering something in the form of an apology, but SpongeBob weakly reached his hand up and used the final bit of strength he had to gently shush him. It was clear to Squidward in that moment. He had SpongeBob all wrong. He was never this annoying, absorbent bother that he thought he knew all this time. He was a truly nice and pure Bikini Bottomite. Eventually, SpongeBob closed his eyes, his arms fell limp, and he breathed no more. SpongeBob was gone. Squidward began sobbing harder as he tried shaking SpongeBob over and over in some attempt to get him to respond. But the sponge's body remained still. There was nothing he could do for him now. Squidward laid down beside the two bodies, curled into the fetal position, and cried and cried and cried. The episode ended with a slow zoom out, as Squidward's crying grew sadder and quieter before the episode faded to black. I closed down the video file and just remained motionless in my chair, in some kind of sick way. I enjoyed the episode. Seeing the dark take on something so painfully made for kids was interesting. Well, one thing was for certain. The creator was right on the money when it came to this episode. Still, I wonder why he and a few deranged people helped make such an episode. I'm a hardcore fan of SpongeBob, but even I would find this too morbid. It's now been a few years since this individual had contacted me. He vanished shortly after sending me the link. The working theory was that he got into some trouble with Viacom, or maybe the police stepped in. But we will never know for sure. I've always had a fascination with episodes that were cancelled or were altered before their release. I wanted an episode that was like no other. And needless to say, I got it.